As I told you, invoice is a very relevant document because based upon this invoice, tax will be determined, and whatever value you have mentioned in this invoice of your goods or the services will be accepted by the government or other stakeholders, and whatever amount you will pay as per the invoice will be accepted to the government. So invoice should be correct technically or otherwise. And law says there are some important informations that your invoice must carry. Under GST, there is no standard format of invoice. GST has not given any format, but it mentioned about the information that must be carried by your invoice. So there is a list of the information which must be there, which must be mentioned in your invoice. And if you want give some additional information, it is up to you. You can give. But bare minimum, what is prescribed under law, that must be present or must be mentioned in your invoice format, whatever the way you want to use. So it says in your invoice, whenever you are selling goods or you are supplying services and you are going to raise an invoice to your customer or to your client or to the recipient, it must carry name, address, goods and service identification number of supplier. It is very, very important. Means the person who is raising this invoice, his complete detail must be there in the invoice itself. It must say who is the supplier, who is raising this bill, this invoice. Then consecutive serial number not exceeding 16 characters. So it must be a serially numbered. Every invoice must be serial number every year, and date of issue invoice. So on which date this invoice is raised, because this date will decide when you are supposed to pay tax. This date is important to payment for the payment of tax. Then it says name, address, goods and service identification number, unique identification number of recipient. It also carry GST number, name, address, state code of recipient also, means the consumer also. If the consumer is a registered person, means it's a B2B transaction. So detail of supplier as well as detail of buyer, both should be there in your invoice. Then it says name and address of recipient and address of delivery along with the name of the state and its code if such a recipient is unregistered person. So consumer may be a registered person, consumer may be an unregistered person. So if he is an unregistered person, his name, his address of delivery, where we are giving goods, we are delivering the goods to the person, should be mentioned in the invoice along with the state where he is living. It puts further condition where the value of taxable goods is more than 50,000 rupees. So meaning is where if any registered person supplying goods to unregistered person and value of goods is more than 50,000 rupees, he should mention clearly name, address, recipient and address of delivery where goods are delivered to the recipient. Further, harmonized system of nomenclature, HSN code of product must be there in your invoice. This is worldwide accepted HSN code for each product you manufactured. So whenever you are manufacturing anything, before going for manufacturing, you must establish what is your HSN code of your product. Because unless you declare your HSN code, your registration process will not be completed. It is mandatory to give HSN code of your product. And deciding of HSN code depends on a lot of homework sometimes. Because due to technology processing and due to composition of raw material, your HSN code changes. So whenever you are going for HSN code fixing, also refer your production process, also refer your technology, after refer your raw material composition, etc., etc. And there is a long list of all products of HSN codes along with their manufacturing processes, and carefully define your HSN code and start your business. So HSN code must be there in your bill if you are supplying goods. And SAC code, service account code, in case of services. It is not ASC, it is SAC. Then description of goods. What type of goods you are selling? What is the name you called this for this goods? You have to mention in your invoice. Quantity. How much quantity you are supplying through this invoice? That must be there in your bill. Then total value of the goods, as I discussed earlier, transaction value or the value of the product you are selling or services, that must be mentioned in your invoice. Then taxable value of supply of goods, or both, taking into account discount, abatement if any. If you are offering some discount, that must be mentioned in the invoice itself. Because discounts have its own impact, as I told you earlier. So we need to do that also. Then rate of tax. What is the rate of tax is applicable on this invoice? Because your product is subject to GST, and at which rate you have to mention in your invoice, and accordingly tax rate and tax amount will be mentioned in the invoice, and it will fix your liability that this much of amount you are supposed to pay to the government. Amount of tax charged. Then address of delivery. Sometimes it happens, friends, that your customer is sitting some other place and he wants delivery in some other place. So there is a process under GST, bill to, ship to. So if that is the case, you must mention in your invoice itself where the delivery is to be made. Whether tax is payable on reverse charge basis. If your selling or your services are covered under reverse charge mechanism, as I informed you earlier also, that there are some transactions which are covered under reverse charge. If that is the case, then in your bill you will not charge GST, and you have to mention that this transaction is covered under RCM. So you have to mention it is covered under RCM. Then place of supply, where the material is going to consume, where the supply was actually given. Because as I told you that GST is a consumption based tax. So based upon the information given on your invoice where the consumption actually happens, revenue will be given to that state. So it is very important that on invoice it should be mentioned where the delivery is given. Then of course signatures of the authorized person on the invoice must be there. That makes invoice valid invoice, authentic invoice issued by you or issued by the company. Further, friend, it says in case of export, when you are exporting goods, you are supposed to raise invoice in that case also. So it says this invoice must carry supply mean for export to SEZ or SEZ developer. So export has its own set of procedure, we have to follow that. So in case of export, you need to mention that this invoice is generated for SEZ unit or going some other country and is manufactured for export only. That types of remarks must be there. And we have different methods of, or this different system of exporting goods under GST. Sometimes we export goods by paying GST, and sometimes we export goods without payment of GST under letter of undertaking, LUT or bond. So whatever option we have opted, we are supposed to mention or we have to raise invoice accordingly, so that tomorrow we will not land in any problem. Because for export there is set rules and regulation, there is set procedure under section 54 of CGST Act, read with rule 86 to 96 and also section 16 of IGST Act. All these sections impact your export transactions. So we need to understand each and every section and the requirement of the law. So friends, whenever you are supplying goods to your customer and we are generating invoices, and practically it happens that when goods are moved in trucks, as I told you that goods cannot move out of factory without a document called invoice. So it means one copy of invoice is required by a truck driver. And because you have supplied goods to your customer, so customer also need invoice, because he has to take benefit of tax he has paid to you through this invoice. He will take benefit, as I explained you in my previous slides. They will take ITC benefit based upon this invoice, because this invoice will be a evidence that they have paid tax to you. So as per the provisions of the law, in case of goods we need 3 copies of an invoice. One original copy, it will go to buyer, and based upon this copy, buyer will claim its ITC benefit. He will write his books of accounts and made payment to supplier based upon the original copy of invoice. An original copy must be marked as original and duplicate copy of the invoice will go with truck and driver will carry this along with the goods. So on the way to consumer premises, if on the way any government official check the vehicle, it must carry invoice. Then triplicate copy is a office copy of a supplier who will record the transaction in his books of accounts based upon this invoice, third copy invoice, triplicate copy invoice, and also discharge his tax liability to the government, because it is its outward liability, it is sale, and the sale or the supply is subject to GST, and supplier will pay tax to the government based upon this third copy of invoice. So nutshell, in case of goods we need 3 copies of invoice. Original will go to buyer, duplicate will be carried by driver, and third copy will be kept in his record by the supplier. In case of services, because there is no movement of services through trucks and all, so we need 2 copies only. One original copy for the recipient, who is the consumer of the services, and second one is for the supplier who is providing services, so that he can discharge his tax liability and service recipient can have a ITC benefit. And in GST, because it is a IT based tax structure, there is a concept of e-invoicing also. So wherever any business house having turnover more than 5 crore rupees, they are mandatory to raise e-invoicing through e-invoice portal. So when they are raising e-invoice portal, this invoice is as good as taxable invoice. So it has its own importance under GST, and the business house having turnover more than 5 crores, they are supposed to raise only e-invoices. Only then this transaction will be considered as valid transaction, otherwise complication may come. So friends, I mentioned you earlier also that business transactions are so complex nowadays. So you cannot generalize the things. So there are cases where government or the law has given a relaxation of not issuing an invoice. And provision says, in case value of goods or services in single transaction is less than rupees 200 and recipient is an unregistered person. So, in open market, whenever going to shop and we are buying something, maybe medicine, maybe stationery item, maybe some ream or papers for office printing, maybe a pen, if value is less than 200 rupees and I am, as a consumer, I am not a registered person under GST, the supplier, the shopkeeper may not issue invoice, and he may issue a consolidated taxable invoice for such supplies at the end of the day. So, the shopkeeper who is having turnover of 30 lakh rupees, having many transactions, hundreds of transactions a day, is very difficult for him to deduct invoices for 5 rupees, 10 rupees, 50 rupees or 100 rupees transactions. So, given a benefit to him by the law says he may deduct consolidated taxable invoice at the end of the day by consolidating his invoices, but practically people are not following this practice, which is non-compliance, and if the government or the officer checked his records, he may be penalized. What is bill of supply? It's again a document under GST. Taxable invoice is one document, bill of supply is another document, and what it says, law says, a registered person supplying exempted goods or services or both, or paying tax under section 10 means composite dealer. So, the transactions where GST is not to be charged in your bill, maybe in case of exempted goods, maybe in case of exempted services, maybe where dealer or the taxable person is registered under composite scheme, where he is not supposed to charge tax in his invoice, but they will raise some document, they will issue some document for the movement of goods or for the services. That document is known as bill of supply. So, means where taxable invoice is not issued and it is a case of exempted supply and it is a case of composite dealer, then bill of supply document should be issued. It is nothing but an invoice only, but it will show that this is a bill of supply where GST is not paid on this document. And when bill of supply is issued, buyer cannot avail ITC, because on bill of supply not GST is paid, and once GST is not paid, you cannot take ITC also. So, customers purchasing goods from a supplier who is not a regular dealer under GST or regular taxable person under GST, they cannot avail ITC on the document issued by the supplier in form of bill of supply. So, friends, once again, to sum up, what is the importance of invoice or a taxable invoice under GST? It says a taxable invoice is an important document. Its evidence supply of goods is essential document for recipient to avail ITC. Important indicator time of supply. I told you that date mentioned on invoice will decide the time of supply and accordingly tax will be paid. And for the benefit of ITC, as I explained you in previous slides, that set off of your taxable liability against the tax you have already paid to your buyer, ITC benefit will be available based upon this invoice only. And it also decides place of supply, because GST is a destination based tax. So, where the customer, where the consumer, where the goods or where the services are consumed by the consumer will be decided by the invoice only, and based upon that revenue will be transferred to that particular state where the consumption ultimately taken place. Friends, in case of reverse charge mechanism, whatever we have discussed about raising invoice, maybe in case of taxable invoice or maybe raising bill of invoice, it is in case of forward charges. But what happens in case of reverse charge mechanism? where recipient or the consumer pays tax to the government and supplier doesn't charge tax in his bill. So law says, in case of supplies covered under reverse charge mechanism, supplier being unregistered or otherwise don't raise invoice for his supplies of goods or services. Very clear. In case of reverse charge mechanism, supplier will not raise invoice, or if will raise invoice, it will not be a taxable invoice. In that case, recipient or the buyer or a registered person raises taxable invoice on his own and claim ITC after paying taxes in cash. So friends, all such transactions which are covered under reverse charge mechanism, supplier will not raise bill or taxable invoice. He may send simple invoice or a bill of supply to the buyer, and buyer will raise taxable invoice on his own and will pay tax, and that too in cash only. So wherever reverse charge transactions are there, tax has to be paid in cash only. There is no settlement, there is no set off with the taxes paid to the supplier. So this is an important point from reverse charge mechanism point of view. Whenever you are paying GST, whenever you are filing monthly returns, we make these calculations that how many transactions are covered under reverse charge and how much is the tax involved in that, and that much of amount we need to pay in cash only. What is receipt voucher under GST? These are some documents explained along with the invoices which are relevant under GST for business transactions. Receipt voucher, it says whenever a registered person receives an advance. It happens in business transactions sometimes that we need to pay advance to our supplier. Only then he will supply goods. Sometimes full advance is required or sometimes part payment is required. In either condition, when we are paying advance to our supplier for goods or services, whatever it is, a registered person receives an advance with respect to supply of goods or services both. He has to issue a receipt voucher evidencing the receipt of such payment, and such receipt shall contain name, address and goods and services identification number of the supplier, serial number of that document, date of issue of that document, of the recipient also, and the detail of the goods also. So when you are receiving advance, you need to issue a voucher, receipt voucher, that yes, advance is received from such and such person for such and such goods or services. It is evidence that yes, payment is made for as a consideration for the supply of goods in future. It also mentioned the amount received. It also mentioned about the rate of tax applicable on such goods for which this advance is received, amount of tax charged, place of supply where it will be delivered, whether tax is payable on reverse charge or not, that is also to be mentioned over here, for which transaction it is received. If it is received for reverse charge mechanism transaction, then accordingly it will be dealt. Signature of that person, because advance, if it is received in case of goods, then advance received is not subject to GST. GST will be paid only when goods are actually supplied, when invoice is raised. But in case of services, if advance is received, then tax will be paid on advance amount also. So today if we are in month of May and we received 1 lakh rupees as advance for particular service and bill was raised in the month of October 24, so in case of service we will not wait till October 24, we will pay GST tax in the month of May itself. So on services, if advance is received, tax is applicable and payable immediately, But in case of goods, if advance is received, tax will be paid when goods are actually supplied against invoice. And law further says, if in any business transaction where tax rate is not determined, then you need to calculate tax at the rate of 18%. And if nature of supply is not determined, then same will be treated as interest at sale. It happens sometimes that you are not clear, though you have placed the order, but you are not clear whether that goods will be taken into account or goods will be delivered at which place. So it will be presumed that it will be an interstate transaction, and once it is clear, then accordingly transaction will be done. So in case of goods, if advance is received, no GST will be paid. But in case of services, if advance is received, it has to be paid in the same month. What is refund voucher? Another document used in GST for accounting purposes, for evidence purposes also, and for GST payment purposes also. And it says, where any such receipt voucher is issued. In previous slide, we talked about receipt voucher. So where advance is received, receipt voucher is received. And if some of the other reasons, subsequently no supply is made, no tax invoice is issued, you received advance for some supplies, maybe of goods or services, but some of the other reason you could not supply such goods or services for which advance is received. The person who has received the advance is supposed to return the money. So when he will return the money, he will generate this document, that is refund voucher. He has refunded the money to the buyer or to the person who has given him his advance. This voucher will be an evidence that whatever amount has been received by me, because later on if you have not issued this refund voucher and you have not paid money back to the person who has made it to you, this amount will be subject to GST. So if you have received advance, you are supposed to return also. Friends, in normal circumstances, it happens that order is placed for particular goods and supplier supplied these goods and order is over. And in services also, services are supplied, invoice is raised, payment is received, matter is over. But there are cases where there is a continued process of supplying of goods or services. You have placed an order of supplying of goods for a year on different period of time or the locations, or you are supplying regularly like telephone services, like electricity services, water supply services, CNG services. In case of construction activities, project is such a big project that it may go up to 5 years. So these are under GST. If any service or any work or any activities going beyond 3 months, it is continuous supply of services or it is continuous supply of goods or the services. If the things are happening beyond 3 months, so then when bill to be raised? So very simple, friends, if you have such contract which is going to be happen for more than 3 months, your contract must mention about when invoices are to be raised. You can have a clause in your contract for raising invoices on monthly basis or on some performance basis, means when work will be 25% work is completed, when 50% work will be completed, when 75% work will be completed, invoices will be raised accordingly. Because in this process of continuous supply, you need money to execute the things. So better you have terms in such a way that you must get money in time and have a proper circulation of money and get contract executed well in time. Otherwise, it has been observed that because of lack of money, because of cash crunch, projects get delayed. So in continuous supply of services, GST has its rules when invoice is to be raised, and it says in case of continuous supply of goods where successive statements of accounts or successive payments are involved, invoice shall be issued before or at the time of each such statement is issued. Sometimes it happens that you have to give a performance report, and if your contract is silent, so based upon these statements, performance statements, you can raise your invoice. So different type of methodology is given in GST law in case of continuous supply of services for the convenience of the business. So it says where payment is ascertainable, where we can determine how much is due for that particular supply. It says the due date of payment is ascertainable from the contract, the invoice shall be issued on or before the due date of that payment. Where payment is not ascertainable, the due date of payment is not ascertainable from the contract, the invoice shall be issued before or at the time when supplier of services receives the payment. Where payment is linked to completion of work, payment is linked to completion of work, the invoice shall be issued on or before the date of completion of the event. So meaning thereby, your contract must speak on that when invoice is to be raised. You may raise on monthly basis whether work is completed or not, or you can have a performance based up to what level. If 10% work is over, you can raise invoice. If 25% work is over, you can raise invoice. So there may be chances where supply of service ceases under contract before completion of supply. Means contract was not completed and you have terminated the contract and work is not completed. It says in case where supply of service ceases under a contract before completion of the supply, the invoice shall be issued at the time when the supply ceases, and such invoice shall be issued to the extent of supply made before such season. So you are supposed to raise invoice for the completion of work. Whatever quantum of work has been completed, you can raise your invoice. There is no issue, and accordingly you pay tax.